Hi everyone, it's Mystery Monday. I'm Sarah Altair, mystery author and writing coach. And today we're going to talk about getting to the final act. And if you get one thing out of today's presentation, it's create a hot mess for everybody. So let's take a look at some of the things you can do, and we'll be going through the wonderful 40-sentence structure that we've been using as we go along on Mystery Monday. So this is where the detective was digging into not only the victim's world, but he's getting really close, and he's getting into the killer's world, and he's getting close, and the killer, the antagonist, is starting to get worried because he sees the detective getting closer. Okay, so all I can say is just let the complications roll. So your detective screws up, asks for help from the wrong people, stumbles over his weaknesses. If it's bad, bring it on. That's really what you want to do in this section. We're in the final section of Act 3 in the 4-act structure, and your detective dives deeper into the killer's world as kind of the ultimate exploration of the victim's world, because that killer is in the victim's world. So as you're developing your storyline, take some time to brainstorm some really nasty ways to confound your detective and threaten not just his discovery process, but even the detective as well. I mean, you can really make it tough here. So let's take a look at the 40-sentence structure. We're on 26, which you can literally translate into chapter 26 if you like, but you just want to cover all these points. So from Bonnie's original 40 sentences, your protagonist retreats in the force. I can't talk. Your protagonist retreats in the face of his worst disaster yet, a disaster that feels so much like that thing he never got over that he's having deja vu. He might have noticed a chink in the antagonist's armor, but not soon enough to take advantage of it. So, last time we talked about a possible other murder, so you have two, not just one. And your detective thought she understood the victim's world, but now she feels as though she's back to the beginning. And there's a glimpse of the killer, but either the detective doesn't notice it or doesn't give it due attention. And so it's time to lick some wounds and then gaze around. Your detective kind of retreats and tries to figure it out. So in Plotland, you're at the aftermath of the second pinch point. And all right, on to chapter 27. As he's gathering new allies and resources, something your protagonist did or failed to do in Act 2 because of the misbelief comes back to bite him in the butt. And we can also have your subplot A in here. So as far as mysteries are concerned, your detective finds new connections and alliances among suspects he was unaware of earlier, and now he realizes that he overlooked important information back in Act 2 that needs new examination. And while these discoveries feel like a new beginning of sorts, his opponent jams it up with a new attack. So we've got our subplot going here. And this attack can take his eyes off the case and onto something personal like a flaw that is holding him back. So it's complicated, and it's meant to be complicated. We're just going to mix things up and stir the pot and cause a lot of trouble for your detective. So, and in traditional story structure, you've arrived at the 5th complication. Okay, and then next, number 28. Okay, he's got to eat crow, beg for help, sacrifice more resources, or improvise within an already imperfect plan. And he can only blame himself. So your detective is just tripping all over himself or herself. He starts to question his misbelief, and his biggest success comes when he temporarily abandoned it. But the idea of giving it up voluntarily is terrifying. And we can also work with subplot B in here. So that flaw emphasized by the opponent, it's got your detective in a heap of trouble, and it's all his fault. Your detective may need to ask the opponent for a detail or help, and he starts to question his vision of the victim's world. And the love interest helps him look at that world in a different way, but he resists because it's not his way. Okay, so we're just getting everybody in there and mixing it up and causing your detective a lot of trouble. So in structure, this is the aftermath of the 5th complication, and it's messy. Just mess it up as much as you can. Make it difficult, make it messy, bring out your detective's flaws, make him miscommunicate with other people, mess it up. So, all right, so 29, your protagonist attacks that vulnerability that he noticed earlier, and at first it seems he's caught the antagonist unprepared. Is victory at hand? So, subplot A, which is the detective's opponent, encourages the protagonist to look at the victim's world in a new way. So even though this person is your detective's opponent, you're giving him some insight, even though it seems like to him it's from the wrong person. And also your detective notices something new about the killer. And was it that easy? Just shifting perspective. So your detective is shifting perspective and looking at things in a new way, and the information may come from the least likely person, like his opponent. So if you're still with story structure, this is the setup for the 2nd plot point, and you're definitely headed toward the final act. I really can't talk today. I had a whole bunch of tech trouble today, and so I got all discombobulated. Okay. Chapter 30. Nope. Maybe there's a twist here. Either the antagonist was using that weakness to draw the protagonist in, or he reacted fast enough to protect it. So your killer's taking an active role here. So your protagonist gets one clear shot at the antagonist, but he has to give up his misbelief to take it, and he isn't able to make that leap of faith. So your detective is right there, okay? But the killer uses a smokescreen, and the clarity fades for your detective. And the detective has one chance to confront the killer, but he has to clear his vision of the victim's world and the antagonist gets away because your detective is still missing a piece of the puzzle. So you've now reached the second plot point in the story structure, and it's going to get wild in the next part. This part's messy, the next part's going to be wild. So I think the thing to stress here in this section of your story is to confuse all your characters. Mix everything up. I gave the example of the detective's opponent actually giving him a piece of information that will help him solve the puzzle, but it's coming from his opponent, and it's really just a hot mess, and it frustrates your detective, and he struggles in this part of the mystery. So it's really easy to keep your story from sagging by mixing these things up, and your detective's opponent may unknowingly give her an insight while trying to stop her, or her love interest may threaten to call it quits. Just make it as crazy as you want, because you're going to keep your reader guessing, but you still want to keep them guessing about how the detective is going to solve all these problems and solve the mystery. So you've got two things to keep your reader engaged. One is all these problems and how the detective is going to get out of them. And the other is the big one, let's solve the mystery. Who did it? So amidst all these setbacks, your detective gets close to the killer. And even though your detective may overlook the clues in the middle of the confusion, the killer feels the pressure. So the killer takes on the role of antagonist, which may have been hidden before, but now you're giving your reader a sense that that killer is there, and they're opposing the detective, and that killer actively works against your detective, even if it's behind the scenes. So once again, in this section of your story, as you're heading up toward the last act, you just want to make it as difficult, as hard, and as confused as possible for your detective. I really hope that helps, and I'd love for you to send me questions. This is kind of fun to write, and it really requires a lot of brainstorming on your part as a writer to come up with all these problems that make sense within your story. But it's also a lot of fun, and for the reader, it's a lot of fun too, because things get so complicated, and because your detective sees no way out of the problems or no way to resolve the mystery, your reader is right along with him, and they keep turning the pages because they want to find out how it all resolves, which is going to happen next. But now we're just making it big problems. Okay, so let's do some questions. Is there a difference between evidence and clues? Okay, I think the easiest way for me to say this, that's a good question. The easiest way for me to say this is that clues are anything that lead your protagonist toward solving the mystery. Evidence, especially in crime novels, police procedurals, are physical things. They're facts. They're observations that are presented in support of an assertion. And a clue is like anything else that's like a strand. It may be something a suspect says. It may be something the victim left behind, or a quote that a suspect says that the victim said. But they aren't hard evidence. So hard evidence are physical things, and especially in crime novels, they're things blood spatter and bullet trajectories and fingerprints and DNA, all those sorts of things are evidence, um, and they are a part of the whole body of the clues. I hope that helped you. Um, and also in police procedurals, evidence is something that is true and can be used in courts. A clue other than evidence may not be used in courts. Okay, I hope that helped. And that's a good distinction, especially when you're setting up your clues along in your storyline. Okay, next question. I want to write a crime novel. Should my detective be a private investigator or a police investigator? Whoa, wow, that's a big question, but it's actually a good one because it's what you decide to choose is going to shape the kind of story that you write and shape the kind of research that you do. Um, Private investigators are, just what the name implies, they're private, they're employed by private individuals. They're often employed by attorneys um, as well to do investigations, whereas law enforcement officers are public servants. Um, and also, it's going to make a difference in the environment in your story because the law enforcement officer is part of a team inside a hierarchical structure. So you're going to need to know a lot about how law enforcement officers work together and how the hierarchy works. And a private investigator may work alone, or they may hire other private investigators, but they're working alone. So you need to think about the tone of your story. Um, a private investigator may be a character, is probably going to be a little more character driven. Um, from Sam Spade to the warden in Lowtown, they combat the underworld, but they do it on their own terms. So, and police procedures require you to do research about the location and structure of how the law enforcement body works. So you're going to need to know, where if you choose a law enforcement officer, you also going to need to know where it is that they work. And then, let's see, Sergeant Derek Pacifico has a book called The Writer's Guide to Homicide, and it'll really give you a lot of information about police training, how they work, and the hierarchy, the general hierarchies um, within that. And I'll post a link to that book in the show notes. And also, it's available on Amazon if you get it through iBooks. There are a lot of it's an interactive book on iBooks, so there's a lot of interactive things you can do, like quizzes that you can take to help your knowledge if you decide to do law enforcement. And also, there's a link from Rasmussen College with more information about the difference between private investigators and police investigators. So that may help you make your decision. But I think the general guidelines for you are: do you want them a public service? Do you want them a public servant and working on a team, or do you want them working alone as a private investigator, and also unable to make any arrests. Private investigators cannot make arrests. That's a major difference. Uh, Police and any law enforcement um, person can make an arrest. A private investigator cannot. So it's going to be up to you. I suggest to help you make your decision, do a little more research about each of them. I know here where I live, there are private investigators, and I met a woman private investigator who helps me with background material, and likewise with local law enforcement, your local police force or sheriff's department, um, or as I've mentioned before, the FBI can help you depending on what you choose. And it is a big decision, so take your time about making that decision. Um, that was a very good question. All right, thank you very much. That's kind of it for today's Mystery Monday. I personally am excited. My next story, The Vellum Scribe, went out to my beta readers, and I'm getting great feedback from them, and I am looking to have that out on September 1st. So I'll let you know more as the time gets closer. And thank you very much for being here on Mystery Monday.